Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to KIPS CSS Network CSS Sociology video series. I'm your instructor 𝐒𝐫𝐲𝐢, and the topic of our discussion today is one of the frequently asked questions in the examination of FPSC CSS Sociology, and that is, what is the stepwise procedure to conduct research in sociology? The question may also be asked like this: what is the procedure to conduct social research? So, in this topic, first of all, we will discuss how do we define social research? What basically social research is? Social research is a research which is conducted by a social scientist following a meticulous and a complete systematic framework and systematic planning. Now, what is this procedure of social research? Well, there are 7 steps which includes in the social research. Number 1, identifying and defining what the basic research question is. Number 2, doing the literature review. Number 3, identifying the IV and DV. I mean to say the independent variable, dependent variable, and hypothesis formulation. Step number 4, research design. Step number 5, data collection. Step number 6, data analysis, and step number 7, we formulate and compile the complete research report. So, beginning with the first step, that is defining a problem statement on which we need to do the research. So, identifying the topic which you need to conduct is basically, it provides a platform and a direction for the researcher in which direction he or she will pursue the research. Number 2, doing the literature review. When we talk about the literature review, there are different sources, but the 3 recognized sources which needs to be considered are books, journals, and the internet. Doing the literature review means that you go through similar. I don't mean same, I mean similar. Similar means you go for the similar researches that are relevant to your research which you are conducting. Step number 3, identification of the variables and hypothesis formulation. When we talk about variables, there are 4 types of variables that are included in the research. 2 are compulsory and 2 are optional. They depend upon the researcher, upon the discretion of the researcher, whether or not he or she wants to include those variables in the research. So, the first variable is called independent variable. Sometimes examiner addresses this variable such as define the IV. Now, students get confused or perplexed that what is this IV? IV basically is the independent variable. The second type of variable is called dependent variable, which is obviously depending upon the IV, independent variable. First, I will explain these first 2 types of variables. Let's take an example. For example, higher the overpopulation, or you can say higher the population, higher the crimes. Now, in this scenario, we can assess that overpopulation is your IV, independent variable, and crimes is your DV, dependent variable. Whenever you need to study the relationship between the 2 variables, it is universal that in the cause and effect relationship, the cause will always be the IV and its effect will always be the DV, dependent variable. Now, the other 2 types of variables are optional. You may include them in the research as a researcher, or you may simply ignore them. The third type of variable is called extraneous variables. Now, what is the nature of extraneous variable? Extraneous variables are those variables which are not a part of your research, yet they have the propensity to impact your dependent variable. For instance, let me drag the same example that I have used. Higher the population, higher the crimes. Now, in this example, the extraneous variable for this study can be higher the unemployment, higher the crimes. Now, unemployment impacts the crime rate, yet I'm not studying the effect of unemployment on the crimes. So unemployment for my study will be an extraneous variable. The fourth type of variable which the researcher might include is called the intervening variable. Now, there are many names for intervening variable, and sometimes the examiner confuses and dazzles the students with taking the alternate names of intervening variables. Okay, number one, intervening variable is for sure called intervening variable, but apart from that, intervening variable is also called confounding variable. Intervening variable is also called mediating variable, and it's also called moderating variable. So if the examiner uses any of the four names, you get to know that he is, or she is of course, talking about the intervening variable. What is intervening variable? Intervening variable is that variable which intervenes between independent variable and dependent variable. Getting too theoretical? Let me share an example with you. For example, let's take, for instance, higher the level of education. I repeat again. Higher the level of education, higher the income level. Okay. Higher the income level, higher the spending. In this case, the centered variable is the intervening variable. You would have studied a very familiarized equation, like if A leads to B and B leads to C, we can say that A leads to C. So B, the variable B, is strengthening the relationship between A and C. Here B is your income level, in the example I just shared. So in your research, independent variable and dependent, they are compulsory. Other two, intervening and extraneous, they are optional. Now, once you have jotted down your variables, now is the time for the hypothesis formulation. There are two types of hypothesis. Number one, null hypothesis, and number two, alternate hypothesis. Null hypothesis states that there exists no relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, whereas the alternate hypothesis states that there appears a significant relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. Once you have done with your hypothesis, now it's the time for the research design. There are two types of research design. Number one, cross-sectional. Number two, longitudinal. Cross-sectional design is a one-shot study, and when we talk about the longitudinal, it's a time series study, and this type of research may be repeated over a series of time as per decided by the researcher who is conducting the research. Once you've done with the research design, you have to select a sampling technique as well. It can be a probability sampling technique or a non-probability sampling technique. Then we move on to the next step, and that is data collection. Now here, you have to, being a researcher, meticulously decide which method of data collection you will use. It can be primary sources or secondary sources. Let me first discuss the secondary sources. Secondary sources can be the available annual reports, journals, or the legal documents based upon which you are conducting your research. But when you talk about the primary sources include quantitative methods of analysis and qualitative methods of analysis. Quantitative principally includes the methods of questionnaires. And when we talk about the qualitative methods includes, importantly, the method of interviews. When you talk about questionnaires, a standardized research recognized by various international journals is that research which has in its tool a questionnaire, and the questionnaire should be a close-ended questionnaire designed on a Likert scale. When we talk about if we are using a qualitative tool, then the qualitative tool may be an interview, and you have to formulate and suggest which kind of interview you're going to use. You're going to use a structured interview, or you're going to use an unstructured interview. You talk about the structured interview. Structured interview is more rigid and fixed, whereas unstructured interview may be flexible. So once you are done with the methods of data collection, then you do the data analysis. One of the next step is data analysis. So one of the, you can say, conventional tool that is used for the data analysis is SPSS. That's the software, basically, statistical package for social sciences. So SPSS is the software. there are innumerable number of softwares in the market. You can use the one which suits you and easy to use. But through SPSS, you do the data analysis, you populate the data, you do interpretation of the graphs, you have to make sure that your data is normally distributed. Normally distributed means a bell-shaped curve. Avoid errors like right skewed or left skewed. Once data analysis is done, then you simply form the research report. In research report, all the sections are included which you have conducted, plus it may also include executive summary and the suggestions. So this is the complete process through which we conduct the research in sociology. This is all from my part. Thank you so much and good luck from KIPS CSS Network. Stay blessed.